Every sensor Unit 0 dropped into Ashcroft Depot reported the same reading: 0 biological activity. The team that walked in disagreed with that reading in less than 4 minutes. Ashcroft Depot doesn't appear on any current Air Force facility map. It appears on one map, drawn in 1988, marked with a single word "sealed," and a signature that was never explained to the officer who inherited the file. For 15 years, the depot sat quiet under the Wyoming badlands, its silo doors welded shut, its access shaft filled with gravel. Then, in the spring of 2003, a DOE seismic array picked up a transmission bleeding out of the bedrock on a frequency that hadn't been assigned to any known installation. Unit 0 was given 4 hours to find out who was still down there. Staff Sergeant Esteban Short read the tasking order twice before he signed for it, because the order didn't match the sensor package attached to it. Every thermal pass, every acoustic sweep, every seismic return from the depot said the same thing: 0 biological activity, structure stable, atmosphere breathable. And yet someone or something had generated a transmission strong enough to punch through 80 feet of reinforced concrete. Short didn't like orders that disagreed with their own paperwork. He liked them even less when Karen Hines showed up at the staging area with a DOE badge and a case she wouldn't set down. "You're not Air Force," Short said, "not a question." "I'm the reason you're allowed inside," Hines answered, and didn't elaborate further. Behind her, Lawson McGowan was already running a diagnostic on the shaft elevator, frowning at numbers that kept resetting themselves every time he tried to lock a baseline. Charles Flynn checked his breaching charges twice, the way he always did before a job that felt wrong before it started. Daniel Hayes said nothing at all, which the rest of the squad had long ago learned to read as its own kind of warning. Before the elevator cage was even loaded, Short ran the squad through the same pre-descent checklist he ran on every mission, and every one of them noticed he lingered longer than usual on the exits. Flynn tapped his breaching kit twice for luck, a ritual he'd never admit to out loud. Hayes checked his weapons action a third time, unnecessary and he knew it, but his hands needed something to do while Hines stood apart from the group, case in both arms, watching the depot's blast doors like she was waiting for them to move on their own. 2 miles east, in a mobile command trailer parked along a fire road, forward controller Melody Wagner watched 6 helmet feeds resolve onto her bank of monitors. She was new enough to Ashcroft's file that she'd read the 1988 incident report twice overnight and hadn't slept well either time. Beside her, DOE Systems analyst Amelia Wells cross-referenced live seismic data against the original 1988 containment schematics, her cursor hovering over a structural anomaly that hadn't been logged in any prior survey. "Tell me the second anything changes," Wagner said into her headset, and Wells, without looking up, said, "It already has. The blueprint doesn't match what their cameras are showing." Wagner pulled the archived schematic up on her own screen and compared it side by side with the live feed. The discrepancy was small, a corridor width, a gallery depth, the kind of thing that could be a drafting error from 1988, or could be evidence that something down there had spent 15 years reshaping the space it lived in. Wells wasn't ready to say which she believed yet, and Wagner didn't push her. Instead, she toggled between the 6 helmet feeds one more time, counting them the same way Hancock counted heads underground, and settled into the long, uneasy rhythm of a controller whose only job for the next several hours was to watch people she'd never met walk toward something the paperwork insisted wasn't there. The elevator dropped the squad 300 feet in 90 seconds, the cage rattling against guide rails that hadn't been serviced since the Reagan administration. McGowan kept his eyes on his tablet the entire descent, watching the depot's internal systems light up one by one on his schematic: ventilation, power, water reclamation, all of it drawing current from somewhere. "This place isn't dead," he said quietly. "It's asleep, and something just woke half of it up before we got here." Short didn't answer. He was watching the depot's blast doors come into view through the cage grating, and the doors were already open. They shouldn't have been. Ashcroft Depot's primary containment doors were rated to survive a direct nuclear strike, sealed on a mechanical timer that had supposedly failed safe in the closed position back in 1988. Now they stood parted by exactly the width of a man's shoulders, scored deep with parallel gouges at hand height, the kind of marks a crowbar leaves, if the crowbar had 4 fingers and moved with intent. Flynn ran a gloved hand across one of the gouges and didn't say anything funny for the first time all day. Hancock noticed the silence immediately and filed it away the way he filed away everything, as information he'd need later. Wells's voice crackled over the squad channel, flat and clinical in a way that didn't match what she was reporting. Short, be advised, those doors were sealed on a mechanical failsafe with no external release. There is no version of your entry point that involves a tool. Whatever opened that door did it from the inside, with something built for gripping, not prying. Wagner watched Short's helmet feed go still on the gouge marks for 3 full seconds before he answered. "Copy," was all he said, and the flatness in his own voice told Wagner he understood exactly what she hadn't spelled out. Beyond the doors, the depot opened into a cavernous silo support bay, its ceiling lost in darkness 50 feet overhead, catwalks crisscrossing the space like the ribs of something long dead. Emergency lighting flickered in irregular pulses, amber strips embedded along the walkway edges casting more shadow than light. Hines moved through the space like she'd memorized it from a blueprint rather than walked it, which unsettled Short more than the door damage had. "You've been here," he said. She didn't deny it. "Once," she said, before it went quiet the first time. Short filed that answer next to all the others he wasn't getting. Further in, the bay narrowed toward a gallery marked on McGowan's schematic as long-term biological storage, a designation nobody on the squad commented on out loud, though Short noted the way Hines's pace slowed fractionally as they approached it. The air here carried a different smell than the rest of the depot, faintly organic under the concrete and rust, the kind of smell Hancock associated with places that had held living things far longer than any inventory admitted to. He said nothing, filed it away, and kept walking. Hayes fell into rear guard without being told, sweeping his weapon across the catwalk behind them at intervals that had nothing to do with sound or movement and everything to do with a habit he'd built after too many rooms that turned out not to be empty. Hancock kept pace beside him. Medkit unzipped an extra inch, watching the way Flynn's shoulders had started to bunch since the door. Nobody said it aloud, but the whole squad had quietly recalibrated in the last 90 seconds. This wasn't a sweep of an empty structure anymore. It was a search conducted inside a structure that had already decided how it felt about visitors. Deeper into the bay, the catwalk narrowed to a single-file grate suspended over a drop the helmet lamps couldn't fully resolve. Flynn took point across it, testing each panel with his boot before committing his weight, calling section clear over his shoulder in a voice that had lost its usual edge of humor. Hayes brought up the rear, walking backward for the last stretch, weapon tracking the darkness they'd already passed through rather than the darkness ahead. A habit, Hancock had once told him, that would either save his life someday or get him left behind by the rest of the squad. Tonight, nobody was betting against either outcome. McGowan's tablet chirped a soft alert, and the squad froze on instinct before he even spoke. "Motion," he said, voice tight. "Multiple contacts, lower gallery. Moving information." Hayes swung his weapon toward the gallery access without being told. For nearly a full minute, nothing happened. Then the emergency lighting along the lower gallery died all at once, section by section, in a straight line moving directly toward the squad's position. Not a power failure, but something walking the length of the corridor and taking the lights out as it came, one deliberate step at a time. The lights stopped dying 6 feet from the gallery entrance, and in the sudden dark beyond that threshold, a pair of amber eyes opened low, close to the ground, pulsing fast and uneven, like a heartbeat under stress. Then a second pair opened beside it. Then a third. Short raised a fist, and the squad went rigid and silent, weapons up, every helmet lamp converging on the gallery mouth. What the lamps caught wasn't shaped like a man crouching in the dark. It was shaped like something that had learned to fold itself smaller than it wanted to be, coiled and waiting just past the light. In the command trailer, Wagner watched all 6 feeds fracture into the same frame at once. Amber eyes multiplying, and felt her own pulse climb to match it. Wells had gone rigid beside her, staring at a live seismic trace that had just spiked in a pattern she recognized from somewhere she didn't want to name yet. "Melody," she said, using the first name for the first time all shift. "Pull them back now. Whatever's cataloged in the 88 file under Annex C. It's not extinct. It's answering roll call." Wagner keyed the channel, but Short was already giving the order himself, half a second ahead of her. "Fall back to the catwalk," Short said, low and even. and the squad moved as one unit. Hines swept into the center of the formation by Hancock without a word exchanged between them. The retreat lasted 4 steps before the catwalk lighting cut out behind them too, and this time there was no ambiguity about what was moving through the dark to intercept them. The pack came up the gallery stairs on all fours, fast, low, amber eyes strobing the darkness in a dozen places at once, and rose onto 2 legs only when they hit open floor, unfolding to a height that made Flynn's breaching light shake in his grip for the first time all night. For a heartbeat, no one fired. The pack held at the tree line of shadow just past the lamp beams, low and coiled, close enough now that the amber pulse of a dozen eyes lit the underside of the catwalk, grating in flickers of orange. Flynn's breathing had gone ragged over the calm, quick and shallow, the particular cadence Hancock recognized from men who'd decided, somewhere below conscious thought, that they weren't walking out of a room. "Flynn, eyes on me," Hancock said low. "Not on them. On me." It worked, barely, and Flynn's weapon steadied half a second before Hayes broke the silence for all of them. Hayes opened up first, the support weapon's muzzle flash strobing white across pelt and catwalk railing, and the pack scattered sideways into the shadows rather than press the charge, circling instead of closing, which told McGowan, watching from behind his tablet, something worse than an outright attack would have. "They're not hunting us head-on," he called out. "They're routing us. Look at the panel behind you." Short turned in time to see one of the creatures at the far end of the bay, upright, one elongated claw hooked into a wall-mounted control panel it had no business understanding, and the catwalk lighting along their only path forward died in a straight line, exactly like before. That was the moment the mission stopped being about finding a signal and became about staying alive long enough to leave. Hines finally spoke, breathless, case still clutched against her chest. "They're not supposed to know how the panels work. Nobody trained them on the panels." Short rounded on her, and for the first time all night his composure cracked at the edges. "Trained them," he repeated. "You said this was a containment sweep." Hines didn't answer fast enough, and in the silence that followed, McGowan's tablet lit up with a cascade of new readings that made his hands go still on the screen. Back in the trailer, Wells pulled up a second archive window she hadn't shown Wagner yet. A personnel roster from 1988 stamped with the same clearance code now badged to Karen Hines. "She was here for the shutdown," Wells said quietly. "Not as an observer. She signed the containment authorization." Wagner stared at the name for a moment before keying the mic, then didn't use it. Some things, she decided, Short needed to hear from Hines directly, in the room, where he could watch her face while she said it. "Short, I need you to hear this," McGowan said. "The transmission we tracked down here, it's not coming from a radio. It's coming from something with a heartbeat." He turned the tablet so Short could see the waveform, a pulse rising and falling in near-perfect sync with the amber flicker still visible at the edges of their light. Hancock, crouched beside a support strut with his med kit half open from a graze on Flynn's forearm, went very quiet. "That's not a device signature," he said. "That's biotelemetry. Something down here is wearing a transponder." He said it evenly, almost gently, the way a man says something he already suspects will change how everyone in the room looks at the mission from here forward. Nobody wanted to finish the thought out loud, so Hines did it for them, voice flat with the particular calm of someone finally done pretending. Ashcroft wasn't a storage depot. It was a containment site. The program was called SABLE VEIL. I wasn't lying about the sweep. I was lying about why. The revelation bought them exactly 9 seconds before the lights along the entire lower bay died at once, plunging the catwalk into total darkness broken only by 4 trembling helmet lamps. In that darkness, something enormous moved along the gallery floor with a weight the smaller pack members didn't carry, footfalls landing in a slow, deliberate rhythm that didn't match the frantic circling from before. Short's lamp swept across a shape taller than the doorway it stood beside, black-furred where the others were gray, a collar buried in the fur at its throat catching the light in a dull metallic glint. His eyes didn't strobe like the pack's. They pulsed once, slow and held. "That's the Alpha," Hines whispered, and for the first time she sounded genuinely afraid rather than evasive. "That's Cairn. It was supposed to have died with the rest of the program in '88. Flynn, breaching tool forgotten in his hand, found his voice again. quieter than anyone had heard it all night. You knew it had a name. Nobody answered him. Cairn tilted its head, amber eyes fixed on the cluster of lamplight, and did not charge. It simply raised one clawed hand toward the nearest wall panel, and every remaining light in the bay went dark at once, leaving the squad with nothing but 4 narrow cones of light and the sound of something very large, very patient, closing the distance across a floor it could navigate blind. Nobody moved for a full second, which in a room that dark felt like an hour. Hancock could hear his own pulse over the ringing silence, could hear Heinz's breathing gone shallow and fast beside him, could hear, worse than either, the near-total absence of sound from wherever Cairn's footfalls had gone, as if the creature had simply stopped needing to make noise the moment it decided the hunt was already won. Short broke the silence first, voice pitched low enough that only the squad channel caught it. On my mark, we run for the stairs. Nobody stops for anybody. Hayes fired blind into the dark ahead of them. Muzzle flashed the only illumination strong enough to reveal Cairn's silhouette for half-second bursts. Close enough now that the rounds should have staggered it and didn't. "It's not slowing down," he shouted, backing toward the stairwell they descended from, and Short made the only call left to him. Full retreat, up the shaft, seal what could be sealed behind them. McGowan went first, tablet abandoned, hauling on the manual override wheel of a secondary blast door half buried under decades of dust, while Hancock dragged Flynn's wounded arm over his shoulder and Hines stayed pressed against Hayes's back. Case still locked to her chest like it mattered more than her own footing. In the trailer, Wagner lost 3 of 6 feeds to static in the same instant and started shouting for a status update before she'd consciously decided to. Wells was already pulling the original 1988 shutdown log onto the second monitor, scanning past redacted lines until she found the sentence she'd been dreading since the seismic spike. "There's a note here," she said, voice unsteady for the first time all night. Final entry before the site went dark the first time. It says containment was never achieved. It says the subject was sealed in, not neutralized. Wagner didn't relay that to Short. Not yet. There wasn't time, and some truths didn't help a man who was already running for his life. Behind them, the gallery lights they'd already passed began dying again in sequence. The same deliberate, patient rhythm as before, only faster now. Whatever was routing them clearly understood exactly how little time they had left before the stairwell became the only option. Hines stumbled on the last landing, Case swinging wide, and Hancock caught her elbow without breaking stride, hauling her upright without a word. Short glanced back once, counting heads by lamplight the way Hancock had done at the very start of the descent, and found all 6 accounted for now. The pack hit the stairwell first, funneling into the narrow space where their numbers meant nothing, and for a brief, brutal stretch the fight became close and mechanical, Hayes's weapon jamming on spent brass, Flynn driving his breaching tool into a lunging shape with his good arm, Short putting rounds into amber eyes at point-blank range until his own lamp guttered and died. It was Hancock who reached the override wheel first, wrenching it with both hands while McGowan held the door brace, and the secondary blast door groaned down inch by inch, sealing the stairwell's lower half just as Cairn's clawed hand closed around empty air a foot short of Heinz's shoulder. For a moment nobody moved. The only sound in the stairwell was Hayes working the charging handle free on his weapon and 6 people breathing too hard to speak. Then, from the far side of the sealed door, a single, deliberate scrape traveled up through the metal. Not clawing, not battering, but something testing the seam of the door the way a hand tests a lock it already suspects won't hold for long. Short put his palm flat against the door for a second, feeling the vibration through the steel, then pulled it back like he'd touched something alive. "Move," he said. "Now." Above ground, the shaft elevator refused to answer its call button, and McGowan's tablet reconnected the moment they cleared the interference field. Lit up with an emergency override code Hines produced from memory rather than paperwork. A code she claimed she'd never used and clearly had. The cage jolted upward, the depot's remaining lights strobing past the grating in a slow, dying rhythm below them, and somewhere beneath their boots, muffled by 300 feet of concrete, Cairn let out a single, sustained call that carried up the shaft long after the cage had cleared the surface hatch. The cage cleared the surface hatch into a night gone unnaturally still. The badlands wind that had been steady all evening dropped to nothing, as if the whole plateau above ASHCROFT was holding its breath along with the squad. Flynn sat down hard against the hatch housing the moment his boots hit solid ground, breaching tool still in his good hand, and didn't get up again until Hancock physically pulled him to his feet to check the wound on his forearm under real light for the first time. Wagner met them at the surface hatch herself, headset still looped around her neck, and the first thing she saw in Short's face wasn't relief. It was the specific exhaustion of a man doing arithmetic on how many of his people he'd walked out with versus how many he'd walked in with. All 6 were standing. That fact seemed to surprise him as much as it relieved him. Wells stayed back by the trailer, the 1988 shutdown log still open on her screen, watching Hines climb out of the shaft with an expression that made it clear she had questions of her own that weren't going to wait for a debrief room. Wells found Wagner by the trailer steps afterward, both of them watching the squad load into transport in the gray pre-dawn light. "You didn't tell him," Wells said. "It wasn't an accusation, just a fact laid flat between them." Wagner shook her head slowly. "There wasn't a version of that sentence that got them out faster," she said. "Only one that made the run home harder." Wells didn't argue the point, though the copy of the 1988 log sitting in her bag suggested she hadn't fully made peace with it either. Extraction was quiet. Nobody spoke about Sable Veil, and Hines was gone before the debrief tent finished going up, her case and her badge with her, leaving Short with more unanswered questions than he'd walked in with. The official after-action report logged the mission as a false positive sensor sweep, structure resealed, 0 casualties. It did not mention the transponder signature or the name Cairn, or the sealed not neutralized line buried in a 1988 file that Wells quietly kept a copy of for herself, or the fact that when the depot's remaining systems were remotely audited 3 weeks later, one interior camera, long presumed dead since 1988, had briefly come back online for 4 seconds, transmitting a single frame of a corroded collar catching the light in an empty gallery, and then nothing at all. Ashcroft Depot was resealed within the week, its access shaft filled with concrete rather than gravel this time, and Unit Zero's involvement was scrubbed from every public inventory that ever referenced the site. But Sable Veil wasn't a single program contained to one facility, it was a network, and Ashcroft was only the location that happened to wake up first. Somewhere in the Badlands, other silos are still logged as decommissioned, still drawing power nobody's accounted for, still waiting for something to notice they never really went to sleep. Subscribe to The World Behind Midnight to uncover the next operation before it disappears. Because some secrets are best left behind midnight.